Speaking to people at the scene of a crime is the quickest way for police to learn the key details of what took place. Eyewitness statements are often regarded by police officers as the main lead for investigations and are generally thought of as being reliable and trustworthy forms of evidence. If someone saw a crime take place or fell victim to a crime themselves, they would surely be able to recall what happened and give a description of what the person or people looked like, or so we think. In fact, the account of an eyewitness is actually one of the least reliable forms of evidence used in police investigations. Research suggests that over 70% of wrongful convictions were the result of false or misleading statements from eyewitnesses. Even more concerning is the fact that in 39% of misidentification cases, multiple witnesses had accused the wrong person of being responsible for the crime. So how does a whole group of people who all witnessed the same situation identify the wrong person? And why can't we rely on the statements of eyewitnesses as much as other types of evidence? Simply put, our memory processes are naturally flawed and can become easily overwhelmed, which can negatively affect the brain's ability to accurately process information. But to understand how our memories can become distorted, we first have to learn the basics of how memories are created, stored, and retrieved. So the first stage involves memory encoding. When information is received from a sensory input, it needs to be converted or coded into a different format so that it can be stored. The three main ways information can be encoded are visually, acoustically, and semantically. For example, rehearsing lines in a play and memorizing them by saying them out loud to yourself. By reading the lines, you would be visually encoding, and by saying them out loud, you would be acoustically encoding the memory. The next stage concerns where the encoded information is stored, what type of information is retained, how long the memory lasts for, and the overall capacity of information that can be stored. Information that is encoded and stored in the short-term memory tends to only last around 15 to 30 seconds, whereas a long-term memory can last a person's whole life. The next step includes the process of recalling a memory, which is different depending on whether it has been stored as a short-term memory or a long-term memory. Short-term memory is retrieved sequentially. For example, if participants were asked to memorize a list of words and then later asked to recall the fifth word that was on the list, participants will most likely go through the list in the correct order to retrieve the memory. Long-term memory, on the other hand, is stored and recalled through associations. Memories are like links in a chain, and each link is connected through an association. For example, listening to a song that you love from your childhood could trigger an old memory, or smelling a specific perfume could remind you of a particular person. The process of encoding memories is complicated and involves multiple processes occurring simultaneously, and obviously things can go wrong. Just because an eyewitness may recall a memory in detail and with confidence, this does not necessarily mean it is a true and reliable memory. So, keeping in mind how complex this process can be, let's have a look at a few of the known factors that can affect the encoding process and result in a distorted memory. The external environment that the event takes place in can impact on the quality of the memory. The lighting, the distance between certain objects or people, and the duration of the event are examples of uncontrollable variables that contribute to the unreliability of eyewitness testimony. When a stressful event also includes a weapon such as a knife or a gun, this too can have an effect on the quality of the memory. The term weapon focus refers to the concentration of a witness's attention on the weapon, which often results in the witness having difficulty remembering other details of the event. Research has indicated that a witness is more likely to fixate their gaze on a weapon than any other element of the scene, and that they tend to fixate on the weapon for long durations. Our brains can try to fill in the gaps, but obviously this is unlikely to be reliable information. In terms of the internal factors that can affect the reliability of a memory, unconscious bias can have a significant impact on the way memories are processed and later recalled. As our individual beliefs and expectations of the world help to shape our memories, sometimes the witness's own assumptions and stereotypes can get muddled up in their memory. For example, research on memory indicates that people find it easier to recognize and identify a person of the same race as them, but struggle with unfamiliar races. This is known as the cross-race effect. Unintentional and often unconscious bias of a witness can limit the usefulness of any statement they make, especially when their personal beliefs and experiences may be used to fill in any gaps that exist in the memory. Overwhelming feelings of stress or panic, which a witness to a crime may often experience, can also have a negative effect on the reliability of their memory. When a person is in a stressful situation, the body naturally produces and secretes stress hormones, such as cortisol, into the bloodstream to help prepare the body to deal with the stressful event, often known as the fight or flight response. Oversecretion of these hormones can disrupt the normal cognitive processes that are needed to properly encode and recall memories. This makes it more likely for the memories to be fragmented and harder to recall. These factors have one thing in common: they can affect the usefulness of eyewitness statements. The presence of visual noise can distract and impair the brain's ability to memorize information, generating confusion and uncertainty. So, let's look at a case where questionable eyewitness testimony played a key role in a homicide investigation. In December 2010, Aaron Sheerhorn was enjoying a night out in Houston, Texas. The 28-year-old was a well-loved member of the local community who was passionate about music and hoped to eventually open his own catering and events promotion company. At around 11:45 p.m, patrons and security staff at a local gay bar witnessed Aaron Sheerhorn running up to the entrance of the bar begging for help while bleeding heavily from his abdomen. He had been stabbed 7 times and unfortunately would not survive his injuries. When authorities began investigating, the witnesses consistently described the assailant as a black man in his mid-20s or 30s and at around 6 feet tall. Apart from this description, police didn't have a whole lot to go on, so when they received a Crime Stoppers tip about a car thought to be owned by the suspect, they focused in on this lead. A couple of days later, a vehicle matching the description in the tip was pulled over by officers, and a man matching the description of the murder suspect was in the driver's seat. The driver turned out to be 33-year-old Lydell Grant, who was brought in for questioning in relation to Aaron Sheerhorn's murder. Although he had a criminal record that included an aggravated robbery charge, Lydell Grant continuously declared his innocence, provided an alibi for the night of the murder, and maintained that he had never met Aaron Sheerhorn. The police weren't convinced. They invited the 6 eyewitnesses from the bar to take part in a photograph lineup to see if they could identify the suspect. Most were fairly confident that Lydell Grant was the man they had seen on that December night, with one eyewitness even declaring that the killer's face had been, quote, burned into her memory immediately. Some of the factors we looked at earlier could have impacted the witness's memory. The crime took place at night, so visibility could have been limited. The witnesses were patrons at a bar and may have consumed alcohol. And some of the eyewitnesses saw the attack from a second-floor patio about 20 feet above where the crime took place, which may have impeded their line of sight. Following the witnesses positively identifying Lydell Grant, he was charged with murder. Lydell felt confident that he would be found not guilty and repeated to the detectives, quote, "I don't care if you have 600 witnesses. I didn't kill him." 2 years after Aaron Sheerhorn sadly lost his life, Lydell Grant went to trial for his murder in December 2012. Unsurprisingly, the prosecution relied heavily on the testimony of the 6 eyewitnesses that had positively identified Lydell Grant as the murderer. 3 of those eyewitnesses told the jury they were positive it was him, while 2 others said they were 100% sure. Lydell Grant's lawyers called just one witness, the man that had provided his alibi for the night in question. This witness explained that he had met Lydell Grant that night, where they went bar hopping together until the morning. The jury weren't convinced by the alibi testimony and clearly found the eyewitnesses much more convincing since they quickly returned with a guilty verdict. Lydell Grant was still determined to prove his innocence. Even before he was convicted, he regularly visited the law library within the Harris County Jail. He had his trial transcripts stored in boxes in his cell, which he read over and over again, hoping to find inconsistencies he could raise in an appeal. He worked on expanding his vocabulary by learning 5 new words a week, and would include them in his various letters and legal filings. He regularly filed appeals, but none were successful. Overturning the testimony of multiple witnesses is a difficult task, and would likely require new evidence either in the form of DNA or a confession from the real killer. Lydell sent out numerous letters to lawyers, organisations, and even celebrities, desperate for someone to help him prove his innocence. Eventually, one of his letters reached the Innocence Project of Texas, who agreed to work on his case. With the help of a newly developed DNA testing technique known as probabilistic genotyping, an old piece of evidence was re-examined. Following this, they were able to decisively rule out Lydell Grant and discern a new genetic profile of an unknown male. Not long after this profile was uploaded to the FBI's national database, there was a hit. Jamarico Carter had been living in Houston at the time of the murder and had a long criminal history. When confronted with the DNA evidence, Carter admitted to having a confrontation with Aaron Sheerhorn that night. The district attorney's office dropped the case against Lydell Grant and instead charged Carter with murder. In 2019, after nearly a decade in prison, Lydell Grant was released on bond and allowed to go home.
Keith Lydell Grant fought for his freedom for nearly a decade and finally won. Lydell Grant's long ordeal is one step closer to ending for good after serving 9 years for a murder conviction. This man, Jamarico Carter, has been arrested in Georgia and charged in the 2010 murder of Aaron Sheerhorn outside a Montrose club. Grant was sentenced to life after several witnesses claimed he was the man behind the murder.
This case represents the criminal justice system's worst nightmare. A man convicted of murder, doing a life sentence, doing somebody else's time.
KPRC legal analyst Brian Wise says witness testimony oftentimes leads to convictions.
Over 70% of all wrongful convictions, and we're talking about 360 or more, are the result of the infallibility of human beings who come into court, take the oath, point to the guy in the defendant's chair, and get it wrong.
Grant fought the conviction for nearly a decade until DNA evidence came to light that helped him bond out while the new evidence was investigated. On Friday, the DA's office announced Carter's arrest will lead to the exoneration of Grant. Houston Chief of Police Art Acevedo releasing this statement saying, quote, "I want to extend my apology to Mr. Grant and his family as they have waited for justice all these years."
That's the beauty of physical evidence. Blood and DNA and blood spatters and gunshot residue don't take sides, and they don't lie. People lie, or as in this case, they're mistaken.
But important questions about this case remain. Carter was a black man of a similar height and weight to Lydell Grant, but that was where the similarities ended. They actually bore very little resemblance to each other. So how did the eyewitnesses all pick out the wrong person? And how could they have been so confident in what they saw? The most plausible explanation for this is that the detective administering the lineup either intentionally or unintentionally, guided the witnesses to choose Lydell Grant's photograph. As the lead detective in the investigation, he would have been aware that Lydell Grant was the main suspect, and this may have affected his behaviour towards the eyewitnesses. It's been suggested that this detective also made remarks like "good job" to several eyewitnesses after they picked out Lydell's photo, which may have helped to increase how confident the witnesses felt about their memories of the event. This positive feedback may have contributed to a complete distortion of the original memory by the time the eyewitnesses testified at trial. Unfortunately, this means that the testimony of all 6 eyewitnesses is basically useless, even in the new investigation into Jamarico Carter. While Lydell Grant is still going through the painstaking process of being officially exonerated through the Court of Criminal Appeals, things seem to be moving in the right direction. He continues to talk about his experiences of being wrongfully convicted and has even written music inspired by his ordeal.
Check it. I'm in the Harris County Jail on some hard charges. I hit the tank, use the phone, gone and call my lawyer. He's on my case right away, cause I pay my dues. He even told me how they had me all across the news. They instantly blame me in a homicide. The snitches lie as they testify. They say the face of the killer never left their mind. It was Lydell Grant, the wrong guy. They tried to cover up the truth for a long time. The case was weak, but Dello had a strong mind. I studied law and wrote the past time. I did it for my haters, I left them all behind. While I was passing by, I picked up on you guys. We never socialized, Dello focused on the prize. A lot of talking down, wanna see me down and out. Thank you, Lord, for DNA. You haters see I'm out. Check it.